The examples are for the need for the wastewater treatment plant. The wastewater treatment plant is already in the negative. So how can you budget, you're gonna budget more negative money to that account? That doesn't make sense to me.
So the wastewater, so let me go back. We talked about this briefly, but I'll elaborate a little bit. Through the general operation and maintenance budget and through the rate study, there was money identified for the long-term maintenance of the treatment plant. That was part of the money that's being charged for wastewater rates.
Okay.
So that money was originally identified at $100,000. So every year, $100,000 should come out of the wastewater operation and maintenance budget and put into that, into that account.
Wait till we get it.
What if it's not there?
Well, that's why it's in the regular budget. So it's going to be taken out of the proposed revenue, one way or another. So
How can you take it out one way or another if there's no money there?
Well, you're still bringing in money. So
Right.
although it's negative $80,000, you're going to have a little bit of a surplus this year over what was budgeted. So you're going to have that money by the end of the year. You should be closer to zero, and probably even this month we're closer to zero
Due to the rate increase.
due to the rate increase. So
Why does it say negative 80,000 then?
because as of March 31st, it was negative 80,000.
So you've taken in 60, 70,000?
Yeah.
In a couple of months.
So
One more.
I think before we were at around 25,000, and now we're at
About 60.
about
Something.
50, 60,000 a month
For wastewater.
for wastewater.
Okay, so what you're saying is you're assuming you're gonna have $100,000 surplus to put in a reserve account for sewer.
Well, it's basically what is being done is we're projecting a certain amount for revenue. I don't have that number right here, but we're projecting, let's say we're projecting 900,000 for revenue. Right off the top, we're taking 100,000. So that means that the rest of our budget is 800,000. So that money is being set aside in the beginning so that we don't spend it. So that it's not theoretically part of the free money to spend through the regular budget process. It's been confined and it's being limited to that use only.
Okay, I'm okay with that as long as that you don't end up borrowing money from another department again.
Well, that's the goal, is to keep everybody separate, and that's not
You're
steal
playing
money.
catch up though too.
Yeah.
Do we have any other public comment on page 8?
It's more of a question than a comment. I've seen kind of a general outlay for the new treatment plant, and I've seen the proposed structure, tentative, preliminary building footprint. But what I'm to understand now is that all the ponds that exist are going to be abandoned, refurbished, relocated, or replaced, and none of the current ponds are going to be reused. So those membranes do not need to be replaced, and they're just going to be discarded.
So there's going to be a significant change in the treatment plant. Not all the ponds are going to go away. Roughly, well, 2 of them are most likely going to go away. 2 of the treatment ponds.
So 1 and 2, or 2
So
and 3.
1 and 4 most likely.
1 and 4.
That's still being worked out. It may or may not happen that way. We might change course entirely and change the whole layout of the plant.
When the current membranes were installed 19 years ago,
We don't have membranes. Right now we have ponds.
Aerated
Yep.
ponds.
but there's a liner in there.
So
That's not
there's
the
a
membrane.
liner.
This is a filtration membrane.
Okay.
Basically, the membranes are
We're
little
talking
tubes.
apples and oranges, so we'll
Yeah.
just stop there. Thank you.
Membranes are little tiny tubes, and there's hundreds
Yeah.
and hundreds of them.
No, I get it. I was thinking that liner
Right.
was a membrane.
So that liner, if you want to get to that point, should have been replaced probably.
Okay.
Maybe 5
Part of
years
the
ago.
problem with building a new wastewater plant is the old one has to stay online while we build the new one because
You can't just
it's
stop.
gonna
You
keep on
can't just
rolling.
accept
You know, and it all rolls downhill as we go, so.
Town.
Thank you.
Is there any other public comment or questions on page 9? Are there any other board comments or questions on page 9?
I had a question with regards to the sewer plant conversation. The fund that the property taxes are collected for the sanitary, for the sewer fund, are, what if they are unrestricted? Or is-
The property tax that we get for sewer is unrestricted.
So when that property tax measure was passed, whatever decades ago, it did not say it was meant for a certain specific thing. They just said, hey, let's have property taxes go pay for the sewer plant.
So originally, the money was collected by the county and used by the county to pay our, or not our, but the bonds that were collected or taken out for the treatment plant.
This is all
Once-
pre-CSD.
This is pre-CSD. This is sanitary district.
Okay.
So once those are exhausted, then those funds, assuming that they continue, would come to the district and would go into the general account for wastewater.
Don't we already get those accounts?
We get part of it, yeah.
Part of it.
Because one of the bonds is complete. The other one is complete next year, I think.
And they're just gonna keep giving us money that
Yeah, in 2020.
and so we'll have the $50,000 indefinitely from these.
Theoretically,
Okay.
unless you want to go and petition that we don't get it anymore.
Stop it.
Okay, moving on to page 10. Do you have any board comments or questions on page 10? Okay,
No.
do we have any public comments or questions on page 10? Moving on, page 11. Oh,
I just have one question on page 11, or is that one you're on?
10.
that was 10. We're on 11 now. Board comment on page 11.
Okay.
Any comments or questions? We just like to make a statement, we did talk about, shuttling money from one fund to another. I think we all determined that that was not only not the best practice, but not advised by council, while it's not forbidden in any way. I would say that we should endeavor to avoid any transfer of funds from one account to another.
From one department to another?
Yes.
I think also, isn't it our policy that any time that it's attempted, it's supposed to go to the board for a resolution?
I'm sorry, I missed part of that.
Isn't it supposed to go to the board for a resolution before you would even attempt that?
That is how it should go, yes.
So what, in the process, looking at it the way it was in the past, and moving forward for accountability, and so that Paula and Darcy don't pull their hair out next time, is that the funds that are in those accounts aren't arbitrarily moved or used for anything that hasn't been specifically identified. And we have resolution, we have a need, a time frame, a payback, everything. If any funds were to be used outside of what they were designated for. I had reservations about how this is set up in some regards because of that very reason. Now that we have Black Mountain on board and we have a balanced budget and we have accountability for all our funds, I think it's important to give Black Mountain's accountability a chance to work itself out and account for all the funds in Black Mountain that way, and I think this policy spells it out very clear. And so anytime that we're going to spend money in an account, we have to identify it, we have to show you what's in the account, and then if it falls short, it's gonna require funds from somewhere else, then there would be a full resolution and everything, and that would be all board approved. No money will be spent arbitrarily or without the approval of the board and a resolution marking time, date, amount, and everything.
Fair enough. Is there any other board comment or questions on page 11?
Ms. Blackman, did you still have a
I
question?
have a
Public
question.
comment.
I think, it may not be what I think. The operational reserve, at the bottom, it says, should have met its reserve targets prior to transferring to other levels. Now, is this just on transferring unrestricted funds?
So unrestricted funds can be used across the board, they can be used anywhere. restricted funds have to stay in capital reserve
Okay,
or be invested.
okay.
So if you have surplus from one year to the next, and you put that money into capital reserve, and you get to your capital reserve goal, and that's been met, then you can transfer it to the stabilization fund or
Something else.
to one of those other funds.
In that order, the order that's
Mhm.
That's,
listed there?
that's the order of preference. If you have a specific need, then it could be taken out of order, but that should be the general order.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a comment, mostly has to do with the transfer among the funds, because included in the most recent audit, and recognize that I believe that this occurred many years ago, but there is an intercompany, we'll call it an intercompany, but basically interfund, balance of about $8,263. And what that consists of is actually in the audit, there's notes to the financial statements, note 3, this is not what I prepared. We've never really gotten into this balance, but I wanna make you aware that there is a balance, a payable on one side and a receivable on the other from 3 different funds. And the net effect is that between the proprietary, and we'll call it the governmental funds and the enterprise funds, it's about $8,263, but specifically, the fire fund would owe the wastewater fund about $8,263, and water fund would owe wastewater fund about $44,669. So those, I think, were cumulative. I don't know when they occurred.
You don't know the origin of them?
I don't. They're
Okay.
just sitting on the balance sheet, and I want you to know, since you're discussing this, I don't want it to later come up and everyone goes, wait a minute, where did that come from? But it is there.
So
You
it's
can
roughly
research it.
$53,000 between the two funds that need to be paid?
It's $8,263
And then 44?
net, but if you look among the 3 funds,
Uh-huh.
it could be as much as 44 from one going to 52.
1,000 or
between
100?
44,000 plus another 8,000 would be 52,000.
Okay, yeah, okay.
So if you want, we can go back as far as we can, but it's not something that's occurred in the last 2 years, let's just say. I've been,
But they still exist, so they have not been.
it's still on the balance sheet, it just carries over
Journal
from time
entries?
to time. It would be great to be able to determine, if that's actually how it occurred, and then to clean it up possibly before the end of the fiscal year. These are just, it would be nice to not have those on the balance sheet.
It would be.
I would say start at 14, or 15, 16,
I don't
16,
know.
17. You'll find it.
Uh-huh.
I actually don't know, I just saw
I
it on the
do.
balance sheet, so as you
And
guys
then
are
before that.
going through.
I know exactly where it's
Susan,
what do you want her to
do then?
August of 2015 to be specific.
Would it cost us $52,000 to find the missing $52,000? I guess that's the
It's not, I
$65,000
don't know.
Yeah.
Let me clarify, it's not missing. It's on the balance sheet.
Right.
No, we'll bring it up too.
So-
But
For
just in
consensus.
case something, in the next couple months, you are asking, I thought we weren't supposed to ever transfer money from one fund to another. It may be, and it would be brought to the board, and those balances are on there. Do we want to have the funds straighten this out between funds?
I think if you ever have funds that have indiscretion, that it's important to find out where it originated from.
Ultimately, I agree.
For how much?
Okay, so what does that mean? It's on the balance sheet, but it doesn't make any difference? It does make a difference, doesn't it, if it's on the balance?
It's on the balance sheet of each fund. So one fund would show I paid monies for this other fund, and the other fund would say I owe monies to the first fund. So,
But there's no
there's
origin.
3 funds.
There's no why it was borrowed, how it was, there's no IOU.
I'm sure there's a reason, it's just that we can't actually tell from the audits that
Right.
I've gone through.
Right.
That hasn't been our project, we've had
Yeah, right,
other things that we've been
yeah,
working
sure.
on.
Can you tell if you're playing the first audit in which it occurred, or?
You might be able to, you may be able to. It's probably either in Black Mountain or further back.
I don't have too much confidence in those other audits.
Okay.
You know.
Well, just
There was,
because-
you know the history and
Discuss that.
who was doing it.
Yeah,
Who knows what
interfund
We could bring something back.
is
Right.
not all that clear.
Right.
Is that why it's called an interfund?
It's hard to say yes or no, but.
Well, no,
It's
we're not,
right, exactly.
we're not asking you to,
Yeah,
okay, cause
Understood.
we're gonna need to get from her what it would take
yes.
for
Yes.
time.
That's what we need, so we can make a decision.
Right.
And it sounds like it's not worth it if you have to go back through the audits and they
Yeah.
count on the audits that were done.
What
So-
kind of can work.
Well, we'll have to figure out where it was and straighten it out eventually.
It could be 15 minutes, or it could be a few hours,
15
but we can at least identify approximately when it occurred.
And a solution.
Yeah, the solution is, do you repay those funds now for the end of the fiscal year? That's really all you're trying to do.
Okay,
I would say if anything, you'd wanna keep it so that the enterprise funds are owing each other and the governmental funds are owing each other, but not have it cross the enterprise versus the government.
Absolutely.
Yes.
okay, any other public comments or questions on page 11? Any board comments or questions on page 12?
I guess, number one there, first bullet, how attainable are these goals in the near future?
You on number 12?
12, yes,
Page
Under
12.
restricted
Department's
fund
goal
carryover?
for operating reserves.
Each
is to
department will,
maintain-
yeah, 50%, 6
So-
months worth.
So when the district reserve policy was put together and revised from the previous version, all the numbers, all the reserve amounts were looked at in the sense of, number one, is it ever gonna be attainable? Number two, would it actually mean anything? So all of these numbers are meaningful and they are at least initially attainable. And like I said a couple times, they're a starting point, so that these numbers can be brought back and the board can choose to adjust them, really up or down, but most likely up, in order to maintain a level of funding that would be meaningful in replacement of equipment or infrastructure.